is based off of this principle. Every deposition that you take, your bandwidth has to be tip-top, and theirs has to be just in the shitter. You always want to be the smartest person in the room, and the way that you do that in a hostile litigation setting is by making them dumb. You don't have to be a genius, you just have to make certain they're not a genius. And you can overload their bandwidth while also preserving yours. And we're going to hear from Gabriella with CasePeer. What we've found is you can do that with young associates. You can also do it with technology. I mean, what we're doing is we're working to automate a lot of our processes so there's no thought required. There's no decision required. There's no bandwidth being eaten up on, am I filing this motion? Do I have to write it? When is it going out? Things like that. All of that stuff is already taken care of for you. And so, Gabrielle, do you want to come up and kind of explain what we're kind of partnering on and working on together?
Hi, everyone. All right, I'm short, so I'm going to stand up here so you guys can all see me. Thank you for the intro. So I'm Gabriella Cabrera. I'm one of the founders of CasePeer, and CasePeer is smarter case management software for specifically plaintiffs, injury lawyers. So a little bit about kind of what Khail's talking about. So firms will use CasePeer to streamline their operations, not only with automation, but of course it starts with the basics, so all the way from intake to case management, to treating management, to litigation management, document storage, right, and everything in between. And the idea behind it, of course, is I like this idea of freeing up bandwidth, and to make you able to focus on what matters most, which is your clients. It's developing those relationships, developing those cases. I'm working on my hand gestures, but I've learned a lot. I got to practice now, right? With CasePeer, we founded it with the vision that every law firm would be able to maximize their human potential, and that every injured client would get the best possible representation and the best possible experience and the best possible results. And from the very first day when we started building CasePeer, we wanted to build a software that would drive better outcomes, not only for your clients, but also, of course, for your business, right? And the one other thing I do like to highlight when it comes to CasePeer and technology is that it's not all just about the tech. So just like service is important to you, fighting for your clients, advocating for your clients, the customer experience is really important to me and our team at CasePeer. And so I'm really proud of our customer success team. It is one of the best in the legal tech industry. We've got some clients in the room, they'll vouch for us, so flag them down, and you don't have to take my word for it. But it's just one of the reasons that we're also the #1 rated case management software built for plaintiffs' law firms. So thank you so much.
Yeah, they're awesome. They're just absolutely fantastic. Hopefully next year, when we do this again, we'll be able to kind of demo a lot of the stuff that we've been building in R&D and stuff like that to show it more in style. It's not quite ready for it yet, but that's the plan. But the idea behind all of it is essentially taking away those decisions that eat up your bandwidth. I mean, if you treat bandwidth as though it's a resource, a valuable resource, and you always are litigating with that in mind, you're going to be so much better off, because they aren't. They're wasting their resources fighting with you. They're wasting their resources doing dumb things that really don't matter. When we have big depositions, and sometimes my father will run into a hostile defense attorney, I'll go along, not because I know anything about the case or because I have any involvement in the case, just so that I can be a dick to the opposing attorney. And the reason for it is he now preserves his bandwidth because he's not fighting with the defense attorney, and I'm just sucking it away from him as I'm getting them to focus on me. He's come into my office a number of times, and he said, listen, I need an asshole on Tuesday. And usually it's me or Bruce. And so we just go with him, and it works out fantastic. It's kind of shocking and a little jarring that you would have 2 seasoned attorneys go to just one depo. But I mean, that's what makes cases. That's what that one admission from a 6-hour-long depo where we've just been slowly pulling away at their bandwidth, and then they make that stupid slip. And it's all based off of this. And what you're trying to do is, it's a matter of addition and subtraction. How do you keep yours? How do you take away theirs? The idea behind this comes from this book. If you haven't read it, you have to. It's a must read. I'm sure you've got a book list from this a mile long. I would put this one at the top. It really does change everything. And these are kind of the primary ways in which you can either decrease your own bandwidth or you can decrease theirs. And we'll go through them in a little bit more detail, but sleep deprivation, you'll notice, is a theme throughout all of this. The reason that sleep is so important is, one, is that's when your body sort of regenerates the cells and repairs the cells. But more importantly, when it comes to your brain, what we found is that there's cerebrospinal fluid when you're in deep sleep that washes your brain out. It essentially cleans all of the bad chemicals that build up from the stressors of the day. And that's how you get refreshed. You have bad sleep, you have no bandwidth, period. And we've all experienced it. I mean, when you're on hour number 26 with no sleep, you're not the sharpest tool in the shed. Let's just be honest. And so that is one of the most important things that you can be on the lookout for. And there's a lot of easy ways to essentially enhance your sleep and make certain that you're refreshing your bandwidth every day. Another thing is stress. And this is kind of the second biggest principle. This is how you should be thinking about it, is when you are overly stressing them, their bandwidth is significantly decreasing. You can also, if you look here at the bottom where it is stress, you can also put heart rate, essentially, at a certain level of beats per minute. And all of us have, if you've ever suffered from stage fright, have experienced this, where you're sitting there just fumbling for words. It's because your heart rate's too high, or when your hands are violently shaking. That's where the complete meltdown lands. But the more you can increase the anxiety in the opposing attorney, the more you can tax their bandwidth. And so that's where, when he says, I need an asshole, I'm there just to increase their anxiety and increase their stress. And while also making certain that his stress isn't going up and his anxiety isn't going up. We've talked kind of about sleep a little bit. The ways in which you can increase your bandwidth is quality sleep, pharmacology, which I think, pretty certain my dad's already touched on this, but this is a drug, it's called Provigil. It's a game changer. It's the performance-enhancing drug of our profession. It is life-changing. It is unbelievable. It has been extensively studied by the Air Force. It is utilized by the Air Force. The Air Force calls them go pills. This is actually a study that was done where they did 100 milligrams dose every 8 hours. And what they found is at the 26-hour mark, there was no cognitive decline whatsoever when they had not slept if they were taking this drug, which is remarkable. How many of you would like to have 26 hours where, exactly. We have this every trial. It's not mandatory that attorneys take it, but it's, they can go to their doctor and get it. Everybody knows about it. When me, Eric, and Rene did it, all of us had a bag with Provigil in it and with the next drug we're going to talk about in a second. But if you're thinking, 26 hours, that must be terrible for your health. This must be an awful drug like Adderall or amphetamines or something like that. It's not. There's actually a ton of studies on it that show it helps with substance abuse and it also helps with depression. And I don't know about you, but when I'm in a trial and I'm getting my teeth kicked in and day out, sometimes I get a little sad. This helps prevent that. It really does. And so it's a phenomenal drug. There's no cardiovascular events that have been documented with it. The other thing is that with individuals who aren't sleep deprived, it actually enhances your working memory. So your working memory goes up when you're on it if you're not sleep deprived, which is fantastic in trial. I mean, the more memory that I have, the better, because we're constantly going through massive amounts of information in a short amount of time. Highly recommend it. I'm not sponsored by Provigil, but I should be. But yeah.
Take it every day or just at trial?
So I don't take it every day because I find that I'm a little bit too sharp every time, and it starts to lose its effect over time. So I generally prefer it when I'm in trial and as I'm gearing up to go to trial, because that's when I need to be on my A game all the time. If you don't need to be on your A game, you don't need to take it. Usually what I'll do is I cut the dose even further. I'll either do 25 milligrams or 50 milligrams, as we're gearing up. And then once I'm in trial, it's 100 milligrams every day. And in the morning, do not take it at night. You will turn that 26 hours into 38, 42 real quick, okay? The next one is a beta blocker. Another fantastic drug. Beta blockers actually put a ceiling on how fast your heart rate is going. So when we're talking about this chart, it essentially puts a cap so you can't get past that strong anxiety into complete meltdown. If you want to talk to somebody who is a huge supporter of it, Eric is in the back. His first exam, trial exam, he did without a beta blocker and he threw up immediately afterwards. Second one, you're welcome. Next one, he did take a beta blocker, and fantastic job because he could think, he could focus, what is the task at hand? He wasn't worried so much about his hands violently shaking. I mean, it cures stage fright. The other huge benefit with a beta blocker is that it prevents cardiovascular events. So that's the primary reason for taking it. It just has this secondary benefit. What's also great is it works really well with Provigil. They have no known counterindications, and there's actually a synergistic effect when it comes to how sharp you are and how quickly you're thinking. Huge fan of it. Do not take it, though, if you are not doing anything that day in court. If for whatever reason your co-counsel's up all day, because it does slow that heart rate, you will very quickly start yawning and falling asleep. So you have to have some sort of anxiety-inducing event, otherwise you go too low. Think about it, it's actually just a valuable drug.
And on that note, if you do take Adderall, don't take it with beta blockers. I found out the hard way. One's an upper, the other's a downer. Not a good combo.
Yeah, you would think
not
they
a good
balance
combo
out.
at all.
They don't. They kind of miss each other.
Yeah.
You take Provigil and
You can take
Provigil and beta
Provigil
blocker,
and-
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, which is interesting because it is a stimulant, but it doesn't have the same chemical chain as amphetamines do. And what's nice about Provigil, for those of you who have taken amphetamines in the form of Adderall, is it doesn't have that shaky aspect to it. It doesn't have the sort of excited high feeling. You just feel sharper. What I've come to find is, you know when you're talking to somebody and you're like, who's that actor? Ah, gosh, I know the name. Doesn't happen on Provigil. It comes, and it's nice to know you're firing on all cylinders as well. There's definitely a reassuring factor there. Next one is Ambien. You've probably all heard of it. Do not take this if you're trying to preserve your bandwidth. It disrupts your sleep patterns, it doesn't enable you to get to deep sleep, and it doesn't preserve the length of your sleep. The only reason I include it in here, and Alex can kind of comment on this, is sometimes the anxiety and the stress of trial gets so great that you're unable to fall asleep completely. That's much worse than if you take an Ambien. And so I always have this in my trial bag, just in case. It's usually the night before closing, because that's when all of the stress has kind of built up, and I need to sleep some. But just be aware of it. It's available if you talk to a doctor to have. The opposite end of that is GABA. It's an over-the-counter supplement. But what it does is it actually causes your body to go into deep sleep quicker. And when you're in deep sleep, that's when you're cleaning out all that stuff. You have to be careful with it, though, and I usually only take this on the weekends. So I don't take it on trial days, because what can happen is you get so into deep sleep that when you're coming out, back into light sleep and then waking up, there's a huge groggy feeling. It feels like when you take this, if you take enough of it, you take about 2,500 milligrams. If you take enough of it, it feels like you went into hibernation and you feel like a bear. And you're just like coming out. But when you're done, I mean, you are completely refreshed. So this is, I call it my Saturday hibernation. So Friday night, I get home, take it down, and I'll get a good 10 hours where it just cleans out the week's, all the harmful waste products that are created from all the stress. Just so you know that you have it. Once you get past the pharmacology stuff, the other biggest thing that you can do to preserve your bandwidth is habit development. And the way Kahneman describes it is essentially there's system 1 and system 2 thinking. I won't go into a lot of detail on it, but when you have things that are just habits, they're automatic, you don't have to make the decision to do it, it doesn't tax your bandwidth. That's why when you listen to Bruce's deposition clips, he's got this tempo where it's just question after question after question after question. he's not actually thinking, what am I going to ask next? He's done this so many times that they're just automatic. And so while he's exhausting the witness's bandwidth with all these questions, it's actually not burning his, because they're habit questions. They're things that just, it's almost like a metronome. It's next up, and it just keeps going. And so by creating more and more habits for yourself, automatic things that you're doing, you're preserving your own bandwidth. And you're also getting the same effect as if you were to actually be there doing all of those different tasks. That's why you've probably heard my dad talk about how much he practices these things. What he's trying to do is he's trying to get it into a habit so that he's not thinking about them and wasting his bandwidth during the trial, which is extremely important. Last one is decreasing your cognitive load. You can kind of take out on this one.
Yeah, and so I remember this particular speech that Steve Jobs gave, and he spoke about, if you see any of his speeches, he's pretty much wearing the same thing every time. He said he whittled down his closet, his wardrobe was, 3 shirts and the same pair of jeans, same shoes. And it was because he was making so many decisions on a daily basis that one less decision made him just, when you add those up, I mean, the amount of bandwidth that you get out of that, the less decisions you make, the less you're exhausted by those decisions, right? So that's another part of how we got, at trial. And I think if you go to the next one, we have a list of basically all the things that Khail and Eric told me I was going to be doing at trial.
Before we jump into that, though, what's important to note on this is it's the smallest thing. What color tie am I going to wear today? You've just burned some of that valuable resource. What am I going to eat for breakfast? When we go to trial, the lead trial attorney doesn't decide what they're going to eat for breakfast. Breakfast is just there, and they eat. Same thing for dinner, same thing for lunch. You want to preserve this valuable resource. And the reason, you're probably sitting there thinking, come on, pick your own damn breakfast. It's not that hard. The reality of it is when you're in a trial, every moment counts. And you have to have it. You don't know how much bandwidth am I going to need at any particular moment. So you want to maximize it in every single way that you can. If we're driving to court, lead counsel never drives. Never drives. Because the actual thought process of where am I going? Do I turn here? Do I have to speed up, slow down? That's all taking away this precious resource that we want to preserve. This is what we kind of made Rene do as in any third chair, fourth chair, fifth chair. Sometimes, I think we had a case where I was sixth chair at one point, which was awkward on where you sit at that point, but we figured it out. But you can kind of just go through some of these and explain what it is and why it works.
Yeah, and so I think the most important one during jury selection was the 4 cause challenges, right? Khail gets up there, he's interacting with the jury, asking questions. We've gone over that extensively throughout this weekend. And he doesn't have the time to write stuff down. Oh, we like this juror, we don't like this juror. He may be thinking it, but he's talking to sometimes 20 people at a time or 12, depending on the jurisdiction. So what I was doing, I was sitting in the back, I was observing, and I was writing every bad thing they said, word for word. So when Khail got up there, and I think the idea was initially for me to do the 4 cause challenges or for Eric to do it. We switched around a little bit. Khail ended up doing them, but at least he can just read it. So he doesn't have to think, oh yeah, so this is what he said. These are some of the key words. This is what he said, Your Honor. Out.
Yeah, what I would do is I'd go up to him and I'd say, I want juror number 1, 6, 9, and 12. And he would have a sticky note with all of the cause quotes for each and every one of them, and he'd hand them to me, one at a judge would say, any for cause challenges, defense would go, we'd go, and I'd say, juror number 1, and I'd just read quotes. This is what the juror said, this is what the juror said, this is what the juror said. And what it does is when I'm engaging with the jury, trying to build a rapport, trying to get them kicked for cause, trying to do all those things, I'm not sitting there thinking, oh man, I got to remember that one. Got to make certain I store that for when we go and talk to the judge. I know that I've already got it, and I've essentially shifted that bandwidth burning action over to Rene. And Rene handles it completely, and it frees me up even more.
And
Which we can do, and like Rene said, we screwed it up a little bit, is what we prefer is second chair usually argues the for cause challenges. So normally we would have Rene do it. What happened in this one is kind of just turned into a little bit of a mess, and the judge, we got the name of the juror right, but the number wrong, and the judge kicked the number, even though we got the name right.
kick both of them.
No, well, we had to burn a peremptory on the one that we wanted
Oh.
because he kind of screwed us on
right.
that. This judge he was a great judge, but he thought we were overreaching, and he definitely was putting his finger on that scale. And these were some of the ways that he was doing it. And after that, I got so upset that I took the binder and I was like, I'm doing it from now on. It wasn't their fault. It wasn't anybody's fault. It was just, sometimes you got to vent a little, and that was me venting about it.
But I think where we really capitalized was during the trial, opposing counsel, he had a habit of asking the judge to give him something. The judge would say yes, and then he would forget and violate his own motion in limine or whatever it was. And so my job in that part was pick out all the things that he's saying that we can brief for the judge. Or he'd even say, Judge, we're going to brief this for tomorrow. And then he'd show up with nothing for the judge at all. And his complaint would be, Your Honor, I just got their papers at 3 in the morning. I just got their papers at 5 in the morning. I haven't had time to, brief an opposition. And he had second chair. And that second chair was literally just sitting there. He was there to learn. He had just joined their firm 2 weeks, 3 weeks before. And so he wasn't assisting in any way. And that's kind of when we realized that's when we were getting the leg up, is Khail and Eric didn't have to worry about, all those, doing Kennemer motions, doing any of that type of stuff. I got that done. And then we came in the next day, and defense counsel was freaking out because he didn't have any papers.
We would actually time when we'd send the brief, because remember, we're trying to dial up that stress, trying to dial up that anxiety. So we try to figure out when he's going to wake up so that that's the first email he sees. Or we try to do it, when is he going to go to bed? Get the brief to him by then. You're constantly trying to overload him. And what's great about it is, and it sucks when it sucks to be the person that's third, fourth, fifth chair, because, how much would you sleep a night, would you say? Like 2-3 hours, maybe?
Yeah, let's not talk about it.
Yeah. There were a lot of times where I'd come down, because we all stay in one house as well, which is another thing we'll talk about in a little bit. But I would come downstairs, Rene is bloodshot, just dead tired, his hair's going this way and something else. And so, but what's happening is he doesn't have much bandwidth, but you got to recognize the point. We're not really trying to win this brief. That's not what it's for. What it's for is that overloading mentality. We're constantly burying him, constantly. And what I would do is I'd come in and I'd say, Judge, we still don't have a response yet. And by the time we got towards the end of the trial, there's like 4 briefs that he hasn't responded to yet. And I just continually remind him about it. Judge, when are we going to get this? Mr. Defense Attorney, when is this coming? You got to do it. You got to do it. You got to do it. I don't really care if he does a response, but he thinks that he has to do a response. And it's just piling up that to-do list and piling up that stress to overload him. We're going to kind of skip through a lot of these pretty quickly, but the biggest ones that you'll want to see is how many of you have been in trial and you want to mark something next in order and you just can't remember what number it is? All the time, right? And you sit there and you feel like an idiot in front of the jury because all of a sudden they think you can't count. You just tagged the last one 2 seconds ago and you can't remember what the new one is. So what we do is Rene is always in track of what is next in order, and every morning he's got a sticky where it lists out 6 of the next in orders. So as you mark them off. Or if I can't find the sticky because there's papers everywhere, Rene, what's next in order? I don't even have to think about it. I'm not worried about it. I'm preserving my bandwidth again. Same thing with what are the hot exhibits? How many times have you had where, what is my animation that I paid 20 grand for? Where the hell is it? I can't remember the number. he has a list of, okay, these are the hot exhibits that we're going to need to know. So I can look at them and I say, I need the, and he just goes, animation is 323. And it just preserves so much of the bandwidth. Is Seaton still here? There he is. We've talked a little bit about it. You got to have an animation for any time you're going to be asking for big bucks, in my opinion. If you want $10 million, you got to put on a $10 million presentation. Seaton does amazing work, and what Seaton's so fantastic with is he's reliable, and he'll give you a cell phone number, and you can call him up and say, what the hell, this thing sucked. We got to work on this. And they take over everything for you. I like my animations significantly gooey, as he likes to call it. There's a lot of blood, there's a lot of gore, it's very aggressive. But a lot of people don't. They'll work with you, which is nice. You don't really have to think about it. There's been plenty of times where I've called him up 1 in the morning. He's usually a little tipsy by that time, but he still takes my call. And I'll say, what the hell? Like, this is awful. I'm not actually that upset, but he just happens to get the brunt of it. And within a day, I've got something cleaned up that I'm excited about. I'm really pumped to show the jury. You got to have a company that'll work with you. Focus Graphics is fantastic for that. You guys will even focus group it. Sometimes we get into a debate on whether or not the animation's good or not. He'll do a focus group to prove that I'm wrong, and he's right. And you get really good feedback, and if you need to change things, you can. That's very good for liability ones, primarily. Yeah. Here's all the other little things that you just don't want to think about. You want to preserve that valuable resource. Bring a young attorney. I mean, there's people who will do this for free. Bring a law clerk. We have a paralegal that we've had for 30 years. She's better than most of our attorneys because she understands this concept and she's able to preserve it for us. The other thing that you can do is any sort of mental note or aid. Did we pass these out? Yes, did you guys get these? Yeah. Eric, I saw when I was on my flight and I was streaming this, said that this is only valuable for California attorneys. Not true. Not true. So let me kind of give you the backdrop. The reason I created this book is because I got tired of going into depots as a young attorney because they were throwing me in when I was 2 months in, taking expert depots, not knowing the rules. I got tired of feeling nervous and upset that I didn't know the rules and I felt like they were pushing me around. So I found all the major rules that I could figure out and I put them in this book and did an explanation as to how you can use them to your advantage. The reason you can use this if you're outside of California is if the appellate court has said you cannot do this in California because it seems unfair. If your state doesn't have that rule, you should probably do it. You should probably ask those questions that another court has clearly said definitely unfair. This definitely gives somebody an unfair advantage. And even if you're in California, if the rule is you shouldn't be allowed to do it because it's unfair, there's also a rule that says if they don't object, it's waived. You should do it every time. We've talked about Rifkind a lot. I thought I saw that on the streaming thing. Yeah. About legal contention questions. Ask them every time. It's so unfair. And when you're doing it, it feels unfair. It feels like you're getting such good stuff. You still do it. You always want to push the envelope because you never know what's actually going to land, what's actually going to come in. We had it's up on appeal, so I'm trying to figure out how I can talk about it without talking about it. We had a case where when I took the defendant's depo, I asked a lot of questions that I thought, no shot in hell's ever going to get in. But let's try it. Let's see what happens. Because of some things that happened, it actually got in. And it changed the balance of that verdict unquestionably. Unquestionably. But you have to do it 100 times, where 90 times it doesn't get in. But that one time that it does, it's worth it. It's completely worth it. And so when you're going through these depositions, when you're going through trial, if you're sitting there constantly thinking to yourself, oh, I'm not allowed to do that because the rules say I'm not, just do it.